Where we're still finding our legs, I think, is in the carbon impact of this digital event question that we've all been faced with, particularly during the pandemic. And I get the question a lot, is a digital event better than a face-to-face experience from a climate perspective, from a sustainability perspective? And it's a question that I struggle to answer sometimes because we're still finding our legs in how we measure it. We know, for example, the sources of emissions are dramatically different. We know that a large part of the impact that happens actually occurs after the event in terms of how we decide to store that content, what we do with it afterwards, how long it hangs around, how much we repurpose it. And that's quite easy to lose track of, right? So it's hard to sometimes encapsulate the full impact of a digital event because it's not known until much later on. But we also know that there's things in the pre-production process like recordings, creation of metaverse environments, animated interstitials, and all of these kinds of things that add to impact along with any shipments that we might be sending out to attendees, even though they're watching from home. And we haven't even touched on the streaming impacts, right? So the streaming impacts, actually, if we look at those three other emission sources, can tend to be a pretty small piece of the pie. So we can look at an experience like we're in right now, and we can run a carbon calculation on an event like this. And typically it's probably going to emit under 10 kilograms of carbon emissions, probably closer to 5 or 6, because most of us are attending from North America, most likely. And that's, equivalent to the price, the carbon cost of a fancy cup of coffee for yourself and a few of your friends. So it's really small, but it doesn't actually answer that question of, does it help us reduce emissions, which is the challenge that we're facing right now. Sometimes we have digital experiences that can help us really improve in our ability to manage the transportation issue that we're experiencing, because it does allow people to engage and not necessarily have to take a flight or travel as far. But there's also situations where, an unprecedented metaverse event or the addition of NFTs, these types of things that wouldn't have otherwise happened actually also create more carbon pollution than we would have seen otherwise. So it's, we can't really say that yes, all the time a digital event helps us transition to a lower carbon way of meeting, because that's simply not always the case. So the key, and I guess the thing that I'd love to hear from folks who are gathered here today, to answering the question of what is most sustainable and what gets us on the pathway to achieving the net zero pledge that was referred to very early on, is measurement. And it is difficult and it is extra work. The good news is, and I feel kind of like an old person, but boy, back in the day, it was really hard. Now we have so many tools that can help to make this a lot easier.